Our presenter today is a professor emeritus at OSU's Fisher College of Business. Jay earned his MBA at University of Chicago, then went to Harvard Business School to earn a doctorate. Most of his consulting work today is on issues related to business strategy. While at OSU, he taught strategy, microeconomics, and leadership courses. More importantly, Jay has been honored with the Distinguished Teaching Award given by the Alumni Association. This is Ohio State's highest honor granted for teaching. He was also recognized as the outstanding professor at Fisher College more than 24 times. He regularly consults with a variety of firms, large and small. The title of his presentation is, "What Might I Be Missing?" Please join me in welcoming Jay Dial to Columbus Rotary.
There's something about Ken Ackerman that I've learned. He has a compulsion to help people, and he is a wonderful human being in that respect. My dad was a Rotarian, and a faithful Rotarian, and the thing I remember most about it is whenever we were on vacation, he had to find a Rotary meeting so he could keep his perfect attendance going, which he did for years and years and years and years. So I am delighted to be here, and thank you, Ken. I'm Professor Emeritus now. If you're not up on your Latin, emeritus is Latin for now you get a crappy office, or in my case, no office at all. It means you're retired, and so I'm enjoying that. I'm going to declare this as a fun zone today, and so I hope we'll have some fun with this presentation. But I'm going to start with a puzzle. How about that? So let's see if that. There we go. Okay, easy one. You see 9 dots there, and your assignment is to draw a line through all 9 dots, but it must be 4 straight line segments, 4 straight line segments, and once you start, you can't pick up your pencil. And I've only got a half hour, so I'm going to put you under some time pressure. If you don't know this one, it's not an easy one. But if you do, it couldn't be much simpler. What's the secret? Think outside the box. And I'm pretty sure that's where that expression came from, by the way. All right, you didn't do that well on that one, to be honest with you. So I'm going to call for a quiz. That strikes fear into your heart, doesn't it, Professor? Pop quiz? Who said there would be a pop quiz? So if you can pull up the first video, a little 60-second video, test of your awareness. Pay careful attention. You're going to be graded on this. And if you can go full, yeah, perfect. Thank you, Emily.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
you miss a moonwalking? How many of you saw the moonwalking bear? I didn't the first time I saw that, by the way. That's been replicated a bunch of times. If you go on YouTube, it's easy to find. So why did you not see the moonwalking bear? Well, we shifted your attention. First, we said put you under pressure and said there's going to be a quiz. So already there's some tension there. But your context was not, I'm looking for a moonwalking bear. Your context was, let's count the number of passes. And that is something, by the way, that that psychologists call inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness. You simply weren't looking for it. And a lot of what we'll talk about today are what are called perceptual constraints. Perceptual constraints, things that you simply don't see, and it's hard to function effectively in a situation if you don't see things. And we'll see some other examples here shortly of perceptual constraints. Most of us believe we see with our eyes. I mean, that makes perfect sense. You see with your eyes. But in fact, what neuroscientists tell us is you don't see what your eyes see, you see what your brain sees. And that's something that they refer to as change blindness. And so we're going to look at a couple more short videos here of change blindness. The first one is the door study.
Productivity hack of 2021. It's this Google Chrome extension called Speech.
The door study. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person.
Okay, we can stop that one there. And then this are more examples of change blindness. Yeah, that's the last video.
The difference between these two men seems obvious. Their faces are different, their hair is different, even their shirts are a different color. And yet an experiment by psychologists Dan Simons and Chris Chabris at Harvard reveals that our brains actually process very little of what comes in through the eyes.
In this experiment, a subject comes up to a counter and a first experimenter hands them a consent form. As soon as they finish signing the consent form, they hand it back to the first experimenter, who then takes the consent form, ducks down behind the counter to put it away, and a different experimenter then stands up and hands the subject a packet of information and sends them into a hallway where we ask them questions about it.
This wonderful experiment uncovers an aspect of the brain's attention system known as change blindness.
Change blindness is the idea that we often miss large changes to our visual world from one view to the next. We're often not able to see large changes that would appear to be perfectly obvious to somebody who knows they're going to happen.
And incredibly, in 75% of cases, the subjects don't notice a thing.
The lady who took me up here, she opened the door for me and told me to walk over to the desk. Alright. I think there was a sign that said experiment. Mm-hmm. And a man there gave me a form to sign. Mm-hmm.
There was the guy standing under a big sign that said experiment. Mm-hmm. And to my left, there was like a pot with some dirt in it and some plastic containers.
Oh,
Oh, I filled out a form.
Okay.
Right.
How long would it be about before
And I asked him how long it would take. He said about 10, 15 minutes or so.
I guess I have the time to do that. Did you notice anything unusual at all after you signed the consent form?
I just signed it, and I didn't even pay attention to anything that was written on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
After you handed it back to him, did you notice anything unusual happen at all?
If you could just take this into the next
No,
one.
no, I probably wasn't even looking that direction. I probably turned and looked towards the clear door. I saw some people there.
Okay.
Then I turned back and looked at him for a second.
Okay. Did you notice anything unusual at all after you signed the consent form?
No.
This is only going to take 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, it'll be real short.
Okay.
The person who stood up was actually a different person.
Okay.
I gather you didn't notice that was different? A different person actually stood up and handed you this form and sent you out toward me. I gather from your reaction you didn't notice that?
No.
Okay. Don't feel bad about that. Actually, most of the time we find about 75% of people don't notice.
You serious?
Yeah. The person who stood up with the packet was actually a different person.
Wow.
Than the first person.
That is incredible.
So I gather you didn't see it then.
I didn't catch that, no.
Okay. What's really interesting is that some people notice these changes and other people don't notice these changes.
Okay, if you could just take this.
And we really don't yet have a good idea what separates those people who don't from those people who do. It might be that there are individual differences and some people are better able to detect these sorts of changes. But it's also possible that it's just coincidence, that the people who noticed it just happened to be focusing on a feature that changed. They just happened to be paying attention to the color of the person's shirt. And the people who failed to notice it just happened to be paying attention to something else.
Anybody notice that Dan Simon's shirt changed color, by the way? The first time he was wearing a red shirt, and then the next 2 times he was wearing a blue shirt. All right, we're good. Thank you. Seamless. Thank you very much, Emily. Perfect. So you don't have to be a neuroscientist to assume that the information that comes into your vision center comes from your optic nerve, and that makes perfect sense in any way. Richard Gregory, prominent British neuropsychologist, notes actually that 80% of the fibers going to the brain's primary visual cortex come down from parts of your brain that govern memory. In fact, he estimates that 90% of visual perception is based on memory, and maybe 10% based on the nerve signals that are coming in through the optic nerve. It's no wonder that eyewitnesses are notoriously poor witnesses, because they're conjuring up something that they've seen before rather than what they actually saw. So there's so much that we miss that we're simply unaware of, and that's. So how much do we miss? Well, that's a pretty important question. Let's start with a simple graph, no quiz on that one. And that represents all of the knowledge in the world, And let's take that little piece of pie, and that is not according to scale, I would add, but that represents what I know. What I know. And let's add another piece of pie, and that's what I know I don't know. The problem is, what's the rest of that? Well, the rest of that is what I don't know. And that's where we really get in trouble. And there's one more thing that gets us in trouble, I would add. That is what I think I know, but I don't know. and there is a very well-known phenomenon that people look for information. It's called confirmation bias. And you look for information that supports what you already believe. And then you discount things that are not consistent with what you believe. And really, you can think of many examples of, or perhaps you were unaware of examples of confirmation bias. I'm a believer that everyone gets the news they want these days. It just depends on the source, whether you read news on the internet from CNN, or you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, or it's Fox News, or whatever. You're going to get different information, but you're going to find the information that generally you want to find. And that's not necessarily all of the information out there as well. What do we don't know that we don't know? I'm a believer, if you can only make that big blue section, don't know what I don't know, if you could just make that smaller, you're in pretty good shape. You don't have to know it. But if you know you don't know, then you can turn to others. Then you can turn to others for information. But you have to be open to what they tell you and not just look for the information that supports what you already believe. Another thing I want to mention is the importance of context. We all see the world in a certain context. It's a certain lens, if you will, that shapes what we see and what we don't see. You read silently while I read aloud. Everybody remembers that one. A newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than a street. At first, it is better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but it is easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs lots of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you'll not get a second chance. 14 almost random sentences. Anybody know what we're talking about? Flying a kite. Flying a kite. One word of context. And read through that again. Newspaper, seashore's a good place, better to run than to walk. Easy to learn, young children can enjoy it. Birds usually don't get in the way. Just one word, and now it all makes sense. And 2 minutes ago, not what the heck is he talking about? Anyway, none of it made sense. The power of context, and context is extraordinarily powerful. This is a photograph of Joshua Bell, one of the finest violinists on earth. In January 2007, he played before a sold-out audience in Boston Symphony Hall, earned about $60,000 for his 1-hour performance, just about $1,000 per minute. Not bad work if you can get it. 2 days later, he busked in a subway in Washington, D.C. He was playing the same $3.5 million Stradivarius violin. He made sure to take a taxi to get him there so the weather wouldn't affect his violin. And he played for about 45 minutes, playing some of the most famous and beautiful pieces of music ever written. Experimenters watched, and they saw 1,097 people pass by. Only 27 gave any money. Only 7 stopped to listen for any length of time. He made $52.17. And 20% of that $20 came from one person who did recognize him. And that was a pretty good bargain for that person. I just looked up his concert schedule. He's back at Boston Symphony Hall this summer, I believe it is. Tickets range from $177 to about $320. So if you want to catch him there, if you don't catch him in the subway, you'll have another chance. That was very famous, reported in the news. He returned in 2014 to the subway station near L'Enfant Plaza. This time, however, it was announced ahead of time, and that's the photograph. It was packed for a chance to hear Joshua Bell. Another example of the power of context. Social psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson asked 67 seminary students to deliver a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Everybody knows the story of the Good Samaritan. It's a Bible story about helping strangers in need. So they studied the Good Samaritan story in class, and then they told them they would be asked to give a sermon on something they had just studied. and they were to go to another building where they would give the sermon. The researchers randomly assigned the folks to 2 different conditions. One was what they called the hurried condition, and that was as they were leaving, one of the experimenters said, "Oh, you're late. You were expected there a few minutes ago. You'd better get moving." The unhurried condition, they simply said, "It'll be a few minutes before they're ready for you, but you might as well head on over now." So either you're late, you've got to hurry, or you've got a few minutes. This is when the experiment started. And as they went over, they were asked to walk over, each by him or herself. And on the way, they encountered a Confederate, a man who was in a doorway, slumped over, his eyes closed, coughing, moaning, clearly in distress. What happened? The researchers watched. 63% of the participants who weren't in a hurry stopped. Now, a third of them who had just studied the Good Samaritan story didn't stop, by the way, even though they had time. But of those that were in the hurried condition, only 10% of seminary students on the way to give a sermon about the Good Samaritan stopped to help. In other words, being in a hurry can impact even seminary students. And that was the power of context. The power of context. You have a choice. You have a choice about context. And we see it as something that sort of surrounds us, but you can shape context as well. One of the things that I find really annoying in life are morning people. Are any of you morning people? Yeah. Listen, if you want to get up in the morning, knock yourself out. What really annoys me about morning people are the moral superiority. Oh, by 8 a.m., half the day is gone. Listen, I've done the arithmetic on that. Many times, half the day is not gone by 8 a.m., I assure you. I'm not a morning person, in case you hadn't figured that out. One of the things that changed the context for morning for me was after my son was born. And he was finally moved out of his crib and into his big bed in the other room. And in the morning, I would get up. That's about how old he was at the time. And I would get up and I would go in there and I would pick him up out of bed and just wait for him to wake up. He didn't wake up immediately. I would just hold him until he eventually woke up. And it became the best part of the day. He's now 14. It is no longer the best part of the day. Context is decisive. I don't want to trouble you with my issues, but he's in high school now. He does not see the point in studying, doesn't see the point in going to college. He's been working has a part-time job as a commercial airline pilot on weekends. What does he need school for? I guess I can't blame him too much. When he was in kindergarten, on his birthday, he can't do this anymore, but we brought a cake into his class, and I thought I would have some fun with the kids and do a little experiment, if you will, and get them to try to think. And I said, well, the only thing I forgot, we got a beautiful cake here. I didn't bring a knife. And I don't know if we're going to be able to cut this cake very well. And I got this little sort of cardboard knife that I shaped. But I have to be honest with you. I think it's probably only got about 4 cuts. And then it's really going to be useless. So let's figure out, with only 4 cuts, how many pieces of cake can we cut? So we're up to quiz number 3. How many pieces of cake can you get out of a cake with only 4 cuts? Shout out. 8?
16.
16. 16? 12. 12? 16 is the right answer. How do you do it, though?
1, 2, 3, 4.
That gets you 12.
Well, then I just can't count.
You're right, by the way. Here's our cake. 1, 2, 3. That gets you 8, actually. We only got one more cut left. How are we going to get to 16? Nope. We're going to cheat. We're going to take those 8 pieces and we're going to stack them up. And we got one cut left. None of the kindergartners got that. And I was so proud of myself. And then there's one kid in front. I hate this part. Like the guy in front that knew it was kite. And he said, "Oh no, it's more than that." And I said, "Well, no, I don't think so. Let's get ready to cut the." He said, "No, it's more than that." And I said, "Well, how many more than that?" He goes, "Oh, a lot more than that." How many? I don't know, maybe 100. Now, I had clearly already demonstrated my intellectual superiority over the kindergartners, so I wasn't really having it. But I said, "Okay, help us understand. How do you get 100 pieces of cake out of that?" And he said, "Well, my cake is shaped like a caterpillar. Easily 100 pieces of cake." Anybody have a cake shaped like a caterpillar? It was probably round. It was maybe rectangular. What is it that happens to us that we no longer have the capacity to think, how about a cake shaped like a caterpillar? Only a kindergartner would come up with that. So these are all examples of what do we not see. I'm going to take a couple of minutes more to talk about. I think I'm running out of time, but the notion of 10. Okay. I'll try to go through this quickly so we have time for questions also. We tend to have a worldview. A worldview basically describes how we see everything in the world. And then within that worldview, we have certain frames of reference. And frames of reference essentially are specific things that are kind of consistent with your worldview. And your worldview essentially becomes a wall of bricks because everything has to fit into that. And otherwise it's uncomfortable, it's disturbing. And so when someone offers you something new, then you try to fit it into your wall of bricks. One of the first things that frequently people will say with something new is, "Oh, give me an example. Give me an example of that." What they're really saying is, "Help me fit it into my wall of bricks. Help me understand in a way that I'm comfortable with how that fits into my wall of bricks." And so it becomes very difficult then to really open yourself up to brand new ideas because you're consistently trying to fit it into your worldview, your frames of reference, your own wall of bricks. And that leads to something that we refer to as already, always listening. Already, always listening. So when we say, "I understand that, that makes sense to me," what we're really saying is, I found a way to make that fit with what I already know. Pretty hard to get new ideas when you're trying to fit it with what you already know. And so when we talk about already, always listening, many times we just don't see, we just don't hear. We either reject it because it's not consistent, or we're looking for how it fits with what we already know. I just see it as nonsense. That makes no sense to me. I can't follow that. I don't get it. So we reject out of hand what we're not comfortable with, or we modify it. Give me the example. Give me an example for something I already understand so I can have it make sense to me. But what we get is not something new, but a distortion of what we've been told that fits in our wall of bricks. Or if it comes from someone with enough authority, we may say, "Okay, well, I'll accept it, but I still don't believe it." The notion of already, always listening. So you have already, always listenings for a lot of different people. You have them for family members, you have them for coworkers, you have them for professors. If you look closely at the first slide, it said something like, I didn't forget the title myself, Perceptual Constraints as Barriers to Effective Communication. And if you read that carefully, you thought, oh my God, we've got a professor today. What does that mean? And so the notion of already always listening is I already know what you're going to say because you always say that. And so that is in your listening, already always listening. I already know because you always say that. And so that notion of already always listening is not just what you hear, it's who you are. If you're already always listening is, I'm not good enough, then you look for examples for I'm not good enough. And when I see people that are really high achievers, very often what's really going on with them is I'm not good enough. It's that proving the next and the next and the next thing. Or the already always listening you have for other folks says I'm not really listening because I already know what you're going to say. You're always going to say that. And so you become that. If you're already always listening is I am not respected, then you are looking for I am not respected. I'm looking for examples to confirm, and I knew you didn't respect me. Why? Because I kept listening for it, and if I didn't hear it, I created it. Well, those are just some examples that we have in this short period I want to that we have that I wanted to share with you. These are really, really powerful concepts that, for the most part, we're really unaware of. And think about that last one in particular, this notion of your worldview, your frames of reference, your wall of bricks, and then think about already always listenings that you have for other people. Think about for politicians, depending on whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican or you're independent, wherever you fall on that perspective, you already know what they're going to say because they always say the same thing, and I never agree with it. And that's an easy one for already always listening, but one that's very common. I'm going to be respectful of our time today. Questions about what we've talked about, please.
So as you get older, does that get worse?
As you get older, does that get worse?
Meaning what you were just talking about.
I would say yes, because we become more, our wall of bricks is pretty well formed. And, nobody in this room was going to come up with a caterpillar. But a kindergartner could, because they're still very open to things. I taught primarily graduate students, some undergrads. Someone asked me the difference. What's the difference between teaching undergrads and teaching graduate students? And I said, graduate students, it's a little scary how much they think they know. Undergrads, it's a little scary how much they think you know. Because they are still open to ideas, and that's part of what's really interesting, is you have an opportunity to kind of shape their thinking and the way they see the world. But I think that's absolutely so, that the longer you go, the more we're looking for what fits, not what's new. And I really have tried to have a commitment. My sort of core value is lifelong learning. But I see it in myself, how challenging it is when you see new ideas, because I too find myself, even though I'm very familiar with this, the idea of give me an example. Give me an example. So yeah, I think that's absolutely so. Please.
So how do you break that chain?
How do you break that chain? I'm sorry, we are out of time. Oh, time for one more question, but not that one. I think the best thing I can say is because let me tell you first of all why you do that. And I'm talking to you and everybody else in the room. You do it because you're human, and it's a way. This notion of change blindness, for example, that it seems almost comical that you can't recognize when somebody brand new is in front of you. The world is so complicated that if you really captured everything that was going on, you'd be completely overwhelmed. So you do it because it's efficient. And that's why you look for things that really matter to you. And so in a way, this stuff makes a lot of sense. But I think the short answer, difficult, is to be aware. That if you are at least aware of the notion that you're trying to fit things into your wall of bricks, or that you have an already always listening for someone, then that is, I think, the most powerful thing you can do. It's not going to solve these problems. You're still going to be human, it turns out, and it will still be a challenge. But and the interesting part about the change blindness that Dan Simons was talking about is we don't really know. We don't know why some people recognize the change and why others don't. And so it's not, these are not things that what's wrong with your brain. It's what's right with your brain. It's allowing you to be efficient and focus on the things that matter. But I think the short version of today is you think you're focusing on the things that matter, but there may be a lot of things that matter that you're not capturing because you're not open to it. But I think awareness of it is I think the most, kind of the best suggestion, I guess, is to try to be aware of that and be open to new ideas. Please.
I don't remember, like, if this is the right term, ad hominem. So I have seen that in social media a lot now, that everybody looks at who said it. And if it's somebody they don't like, what they just said was ridiculous or stupid. And I've seen that just really increase, and I have to catch myself a lot of times. Like, maybe Bill Maher said something that was actually smart. In other words, do you see that change in that? Because I think when I am on social media, I'm talking just like Twitter. I just like to follow things, and everybody seems to automatically go to not what the person said, but who that person is.
Yeah.
He's an idiot. She's an idiot. Can't believe anything they say.
Because they have an already always listening for that person. Would be interesting to take that same quote, attach a different name to it, and then ask people whether they agree or not. And I suspect their agreement would change substantially because they have an already always listening for, in a more positive way, for perhaps a different person. But I think that's a perfect example of what we've described today as already always listening.
In your dealings with different businesses and consulting, is there a theme of a certain topic or subject that people do overlook? That, you know, in different, I guess, types of businesses and things?
So my area that I work in, as Ken mentioned, is strategy. Strategy, invariably, when I'm on a plane somewhere, I'm sitting next to someone chatty. I'm not a real chatty guy. And I'll say, well, what do you do? Oh, I'm a professor. What do you teach? Strategy. Well, what is strategy? Why didn't I put my headphones on? We try to answer the question, why are some businesses more successful than others? But I think the most difficult thing people have is understanding the importance of focus. Strategy is as much about what you don't do as what you do. So rather than looking for what's next, what do we do more of, think about what do you do less of, and focus on what you're really good at, not what's more, and more. Nobody can be great at everything. And I think that is the single biggest challenge that I find, and particularly people who are high up in the organization, they're high achievers. They got there by doing more and more, and so it becomes very difficult for them to accept maybe we should be doing less, and what are we going to do less of to allow us to focus on what we're really good at. I think that's probably the most common thing that I find, is people being willing to accept we need to do less. One more.
What happens when the speaker says something that directly contradicts what I know and leaves me in the position that now I don't know whether what I thought I knew is correct or whether the speaker is incorrect?
Give us an example.
Well, let me go to my standard answer. It depends. Mostly it depends on whether I'm the speaker. Well, I think it's back to this question, is let's be open to the notion that maybe they're on to something. And I don't necessarily have to agree with everything they're saying. You don't have to buy everything we're selling here. But let's at least be open to where did they come from. And if you're trying to fit it into your wall of bricks, it's going to be very challenging to do that. And so be open to the notion that maybe if they're not entirely right, at least they're on to something. And then help me understand your thinking about that. Because I find I rarely learn anything while I'm talking. But the more I listen, and if I can listen with an open mind and an open heart, then my opportunities to really have lifelong learning be a part of who I am becomes much more powerful. But it's a difficult discipline because we're trying to fit it into what we already know and believe. If you can suspend that for the notion that I don't know what I don't know, and this person may know something about what I don't know, then there's an opening there. It may not convince you, and hopefully they're interested in, well, give me your thoughts, tell me your line of thinking, so then we can have an exchange. But so often the exchanges are trying to convince them that you're right, rather than being open to what might I be missing. And I think that's sort of the most important lesson. Okay, thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you guys on the 28th. Have a great week.